Okay, members, we are back in session. We have lots of business before the House. We are going to move to, we're going to take up amendments on file item number, pardon me, that's a WARF item. It's AB 2878 by the Committee on Judiciary, presented by Mr. Stone. Mr. Stone, you have amendments before the House. Members. Clerk will read with amendments.
Assembly Bill 2878 with amendments by Assemblymember Stone.
Mr. Stone, you may open on the amendments.
The amendments. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. First, I would like to thank my Vice Chair for his indulgence and help. It was just 2 days ago that this bill was up, and I'd like to thank each member of the Judiciary Committee for working so closely with me as we worked with the Senate and the Bar in crafting a set of amendments that I hope, will satisfy concerns raised. And thank you to leadership for the process to get us to this point. What these amendments will do that are different than what I had presented on Tuesday would be that it would create a majority non-attorney governing board and would require that elected members have or that the appointed members have a certain level of expertise in order to be in that position. By doing this, we eliminate any concern under the North Carolina case with respect to antitrust. It also creates an independent governing reform commission that will report back to the legislature early next year, which will settle and discuss the issue of disunification or the overall structure of the bar to ensure that the public protection is the primary function of the state bar. It also establishes real protocols for the bar to aggressively investigate cases of an unlawful practice of law, including the notorio cases that we have been hearing so much about, the cases that sat in a drawer for such a long time, never being addressed. That would not happen under these amendments, and ensuring that the bar then aggressively enforce them and then bring them into state court. It establishes a discipline monitor to review and oversee the bar's discipline functions, again, something that had been criticized in previous audit. We are also asking that the state auditor increase her role in the audits that happen with respect to the bar. So we will be, over the next 3 or 4 years, seeing much more in-depth financial and performance audits on the bar under these measures. Again, we're requiring significant improvements to the client security fund, preventing the bar from creating additional nonprofits, and then doing some of the transparency cleanup. These are the amendments that are before us today in order to amend AB 2878, which we will then take up in its full, and I respectfully request your support for these amendments.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. See no discussion or debate on the amendments. And without objection, we may take a voice vote on the amendments. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say nay. The ayes have it. The amendments are adopted. We are going to take up the bill in chief, AB 2878. The clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 2878 by the Committee on Judiciary and Act relating to State Bar.
Mr. Stone, you may open on the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. I described the amendments, which are amending most of the sections we had addressed. The one section we did not amend was the simple continuation of the bar dues. With that, I know that there had been a number of issues raised, and I'm hoping that we can come to a consensus here today and support this bill as it moves forward, and I would appreciate your aye votes.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. Mr. Chu, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Let me first start by thanking our Judiciary Committee Chairman for his work, not just in the last couple of days, but for months, to respond to the concerns that have been raised in our Judiciary Committee and by the public. I also want to take a moment and thank the State Bar's advocate for her diligent work with us to move this forward. And let me also start by saying that I am willing to support the amendments and this bill as it stands today, though from my perspective, I think these amendments are the bare minimum of what we need to begin to right the wrongs that occurred due to the lack of oversight in the State Bar. As our chairman just summarized, the amendments cover ensuring that we're monitoring discipline, ensuring that we have adequate state auditor oversight to review bar expenses, executive compensation, outside contracts, real estate holdings. It ensures that we're restructuring the Board of Trustees with a majority of public members and a Supreme Court set of appointments for the president and vice president of the board. What I will say, though, that is not in this bill, that I'm disappointed that is not in this bill, is real certainty that we are going to move toward deunification. The idea that we cannot continue to have a trade association that also has the regulatory function of self-regulating this industry. There are dozens of professions and occupations in our state that the state licenses and regulates, from doctors and nurses to accountants and engineers, architects, dentists, contractors, just to name a few. Lawyers are conspicuously absent from that list. And I, for one, think that we need to move forward with deunification in this bill. The amendments require the study of this topic. I do hope that when this study is finished by next April, we are going to have another conversation about this, and I hope we can move forward on that as well. Again, these are amendments that I think of as the bare minimum to move forward. Anything less than these amendments, from my perspective, I don't think we should accept. And with that, I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Chu. Mr. Wagner, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Speaker, I also want to begin with a sincere thanks to the Chairman of the Judiciary Committee. We entered into some fairly uncharted waters with this board, with this House's very wise action a couple of days ago to reject as inadequate the bill that was before us and to insist upon some changes. Some very real and some very significant amendments have been added to this bill. I share the concerns of my colleague from San Francisco. I do think, though a good start, perhaps the bare minimum. If, in fact, the Senate weakens this further, when it comes back on concurrence, everybody here ought to take a very good hard look and probably reject something that is weaker than what we have here. But what we have here is a very good first step in exercising our oversight responsibilities with respect to the State Bar, and the chairman is to be sincerely commended. This is the way the process really ought to work. Taking the input of this House, taking it seriously, taking it back to the proponents and opponents, and hammering out some things that really do grapple with significant problems. We aren't yet over those problems. This is not a panacea, but the bar has gotten the message and is working honestly and straightforwardly with all of us. That's a great thing. And at this point, we have at least teed up the question of deunification, which was also raised by my friend from San Francisco. I don't want to prejudge that. I don't necessarily believe that deunification, when and if it comes, will solve all of the problems that we've identified so far. That said, it is a very worthwhile idea to explore. It makes a whole lot of sense to me, and I anticipate it will make a whole lot of sense to many of the folks on this floor when ultimately that issue comes back. It isn't here yet. This bill isn't perfect, but it is a darn sight better than it was a couple of days ago. This House deserves sincere compliments for doing its oversight job very well. The chairman deserves compliments for doing the work he has done very well. And altogether, this is a bill that today deserves your support. I urge an aye vote.
Thank you, Mr. Wagner. Mr. Holden, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I rise in support of the newly amended AB 2879 and thank the Chair of Judiciary, 2878, and thank the Chair of Judiciary for his hard work this week in developing amendments that begin to address the dysfunction in the California State Bar. Not only do these amendments better protect the public from the unauthorized practice of law, but these amendments also ensure that there will be ongoing study as to whether the state bar should be split into two entities, similar to the regulatory structure imposed on doctors. These amendments reflect a modest first step towards tackling the issues plaguing the state bar, and should this bill return to the Assembly for concurrence, we should all ensure that measure is as strong, if not stronger, than that which we are passing today. With that, I request your aye vote on this important measure to provide needed oversight for the State Bar of California.
Thank you, Mr. Holden. Mr. Alejo, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker and members. As a member of the Assembly Judiciary Committee, we take our role of oversight and addressing issues that come and that impact the State Bar very seriously. As was mentioned just the other day, there have been two stinging audits with large criticisms that shed light on some major problems that not only impact the State Bar, but that showed that some of our most vulnerable communities were not having their concerns addressed with people who are taking advantage of them by these scofflaw notarios. I also want to commend our chair, but also our Assembly Judiciary staff who didn't give up on this. They knew that simply the State Bar couldn't come to us and ask us to reauthorize them collecting State Bar dues without addressing the real problems that have been put before the legislature. Each of us sent a really strong and clear message to the State Bar when we stayed off or voted against this bill the other day. They had a clear and convincing message from us. And as a result of that vote and your ability to stand up to the State Bar, now we have some serious additions that were put into this bill. And as my colleague from San Francisco said, it's just a start. But it creates a roadmap for us to really look at some major reorganization, some deunification that could perhaps put the bar in a better standing and be more effective in serving the state of California in the future. I respectfully ask that I vote on this bill today.
Mr. Levine, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think it goes to the positive note of the chair and the author of this bill about the hard work that's been done on this bill, but also the diversity across this floor, where there is a demand that this bill stay strong and, in fact, can be strengthened through the legislative process, and that it must not be weakened. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Levine. All discussion having ceased, Mr. Stone, you may close.
Thank you. I very much appreciate all the comments on the floor today, the support from this House for the strongest possible set of reforms. There's agreement between the Senate Judiciary, Chief Justice, about the need for level of reforms. We've been debating that for quite some time. Going forward with the strength of this bill and the strength given to the Judiciary Committee by this House, I am very confident that we can proceed throughout this year and put together a bar governance reform package that will make us all proud, and I ask for your aye votes.
Thank you, Mr. Stone. With that, clerk will open the roll. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. All members vote or desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 75, no 0. The measure passes. Members, back in Assembly third reading where we left off before recess. We're going to pass temporarily on file item 105. We are going to take up file item 106. That's AB 1653 by Dr. Weber. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1653 by Assemblymember Weber, enacting the post-secondary education.
Dr. Weber, you may open.
Yes, Mr. Speaker and members, I rise today to present to you 1653, the post-secondary education campus climate bill. Most of you know the history of the Campus Climate Committee, how it came into existence in 2014, and as a result of that, we've consistently had hearings across the state on various issues that affect campus climate, issues of sexual assault, issues of food insecurity and homelessness, as well as the concept of freedom of speech. This bill continues the idea that we need to have some accounting for what is happening on our campuses, and so we have expanded the categories for inclusion this year, not only to deal with the issue of race and gender issues, but the issue of homelessness and food insecurity as well as being asked for in terms of an accounting to our campuses. This bill differs from last year's bill also because it not only talks about those public institutions, but also the private institutions who also have asked us to include them in the discussion of campus climate. This bill also addresses the issue of the Clery Act and makes references to that so that our campuses are developing policies that coincide with that. I respectfully ask for your aye vote in 1653 as we move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Weber. Seeing no debate or discussion on the item, clerk will open the roll. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. All members vote who desire to vote. Clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 50, noes 12. The measure passes. In file order, file item 107, that's AB 1676. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 1676 by Assemblymember Campos and others, an act relating to employers.
Ms. Campos, you may open.
Mr. Speaker and members, I present to you AB 1676, a bill that would create a foundation to ensure pay equity for women across the state. California has one of the largest wage gaps for African American women and Latina women who make just 64 cents and 44 cents for every $1 a white male makes. Just last week, the state auditor released an audit of pay equity practices in 4 of our biggest counties. The audit revealed that the total wage gap increased for all 4 counties since 2011. One of the biggest hurdles women faced in closing the gender wage gap is the fact that once a woman starts a job where she is underpaid, it is extremely difficult for her to ever catch up in pay. This is because most workers are hindered by their prior salary and often can only make small bumps in their pay when they move from job to job. In order to enact real change, employers should not require women to reveal their previous salary. AB 1676 will halt gender pay inequality at its source, the hiring process, by ensuring that an employer doesn't use a woman's prior salary as the only factor in determining her new salary. By doing this, employers would be required to evaluate job candidates and make salary decisions based on more unbiased and objective criteria like education, skills, and experience. More than 50 years after passage of the Equal Pay Act, it is clear that the pay gap will not go away on its own. AB 1676 will help bring historical injustice in pay equity to a standstill. Members, I request your aye vote on this bill.
Thank you, Ms. Campos. Mr. Harper, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We have a lot of discussion on this floor about transparency. You look at this bill, it's the direct opposite of transparency. It's seeking to make it so that employers can't find out the information to be able to make an appropriate job offer. Seriously, take a look at this and reject this bill.
Mr. DeBabne, you are recognized.
Question for the author.
Without objection.
Ms. Campos, I appreciate your work on this bill. I know that you brought this bill up last year, and I know there was a few questions on it that I even had and a couple of my colleagues had. One of the things that I questioned last year was, would this affect our institution? I'm very frustrated that often I can only pay my staff a certain percentage higher than their previous employment. I think that's also bad policy. Would this bill in its current form change our own institution's hiring practices and make us in line with this law so we're not asking business to do something that we ourselves don't abide by?
Ms. Campos.
Thank you for the question. And yes, last year's bill did not have that provision in. This bill would require the Assembly to follow the same practice that we're asking for the public and private sector as well.
Thank you for correcting that hypocrisy.
Ms. Garcia, you are recognized.
Members, I rise as the Vice Chair of the Women's Caucus. This is one of our number one priorities in our caucus. It's our only Assembly bill priority actually out here. Last year we did a lot of work to move the ball forward on gender equity, but this is the next step that we need to do. Ms. Campos has been working on this. I think we all have firsthand experience of what this practice does and why we need to correct it. This bill doesn't just correct it for the rest of the state, but it includes our institution. Very proud of the work that we've been doing. I urge a strong aye vote from all of our members, and I hope all of our colleagues across the aisle, male and female, join in on sending a message that pay inequity is never okay, and in California we're going to correct it by all means possible. I strongly encourage an aye vote. Thank you.
Mr. Allen, you are recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As a small business owner and employer in California, it was my understanding that when I interview an applicant for a job, I can't take their gender into account when I hire them. Not that I would like to. In my opinion, a job is a job. Whoever can do that job, it doesn't matter to me what gender they are or really anything else other than their qualifications for that job. So I really find that the concept of this being cast a gender issue is entirely disingenuous. Furthermore, this bill came before us before in 2015, and it was vetoed by the governor. He said, this bill broadly prohibits employers from obtaining relevant information with little evidence that this would assure more equitable wages. Look, I understand that everybody wants to make more money, and that's fantastic. Everybody should make more money. However, to deny employers such as myself the ability to understand what a potential applicant has made before, it makes it very difficult for us to accurately assess that employee's value in the marketplace and appropriately compensate them to attract them to the job for which they are applying. This bill is not about gender. This bill is about hiring more people. And if you like to have more people working, you need to vote no on this bill. Because as an employer, I will tell you, this will make it extremely difficult to figure out what you need to pay someone and where they've been before and what their qualifications are for whatever job you happen to be hiring them for.
Ms. Grove, you are recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As an employer, I rise in opposition of this bill. I think we're all in agreement that equal pay for equal work is something that is necessary and needed. And I would hope that we wouldn't have to pass legislation regarding that. But the reason why I think this is just a big waste of time, not meaning the legislation, but a big waste of time when it comes to interviewing applicants, is right now when we put an ad in the paper, put something on executive search, we usually get anywhere between 100 and 125 applicants per job because there aren't a lot of jobs out there that are available. So if we post a job, and this job particularly pays between $85,000 and say $100,000 a year, that's the range that we've set up for a business developer or whatever the position is, and you get people that submit their resumes and they make $250,000 a year, $150,000 a year, $300,000 a year, and you're not allowed, you just exclude those people because you're not going to waste their time coming and offering them a job for $95,000 to $100,000 a year when they're used to making $250,000, because some people do make that on particular jobs. So I think it's just a waste of the applicant's time and the employer's time when you have to do that. If you have a history of someone's salary history, it's not discriminatory. It just gives you a good basis to start from. Maybe they make $120,000, but you can say, hey, this is a job you can grow into. The position starts at $95,000, and it's not to drop their wages. It's the budget that you have set for those wages as an employer for that position in your company. It's not discriminatory in any way, shape, or form. When we look at wages, we look at someone who has the quality, the qualifications, and it doesn't matter if they're male or female. If they're qualified to do the job, then you look at the quality of work that they perform. You don't look at their wages in the past history other than to make sure that the wages that you are offering will meet their expectations and your expectations without being discriminatory and wasting people's time coming in to interview for a position that they're not going to take because the wages don't meet the requirements that they're expecting in the first place. So I would urge a no vote.
Dr. Weber, you are recognized.
Yes, I rise in support of this particular bill, 1676. If we're ever going to break the cycle of discrimination, it takes really strong and affirmative action. And I know we hate the word affirmative action. But it takes that, because so often the discriminatory practices are embedded in our everyday lives and the things that we do every day. Even in this house, in this building, we have discrimination based on what male and female salaries. If you look at where the salary levels are, they're there. Women are making less than men. And we're having to talk about how we can equalize it, not among the members here, but among the staff that works in the building. Not the members, but the staff. And I'm probably figuring if we had the opportunity to discriminate among individual members based on the work we do, we'd probably find women working harder but making less. But fortunately, we don't have that opportunity to do that. But we do have that in this house, and it exists everywhere. And yes, if you have a budget that's only $150,000, that's all you're going to pay. It doesn't say that because someone made $175,000, you have to meet that. But you should not be taking into consideration where folks have been, especially when you know, and I know, that the system has always been rigged against women and rigged against people of color when it comes to employment. If you're going to basically equalize a situation, you have to get out of that practice. And this is one of the ways of beginning to equalize it. It is only nice and theoretical to talk about equal pay for equal work. But that's going to require much more effort than simply saying the words. We're going to have to do some affirmative and aggressive action. And this is a first step. And I support this bill and ask that we all vote aye on 1676. And if the governor vetoed it last year, we keep putting it forward, as so many bills that are just have been put forward in this House year after year, only to arrive finally at an understanding among even the members that this is something good that we should do. And I ask for your support for 1676.
All debate having ceased on the measure, Ms. Campos, you may close.
Thank you. And I want to take my colleague from San Diego's comments as my closing and leave you with this. At some point, we need to be able to stand up for the women that are just graduating from college so that they're on an even playing field with their male counterparts. And they're not having to go to their employer and say, I've been working for your company for the past 5 years, and you hired somebody else who happens to be a male at a salary that's $10,000 or $15,000 more than I am getting paid right now. At some point, we have to say enough is enough and respect and give our women of color and women, period, the ability to make exactly the same that their male counterparts are making. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
And with that, clerk will open the roll. All members vote or desire to vote. 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 Clerk will close the roll, tally the vote. Ayes 44, noes 26. The measure passes. Mr. Calderon, you are recognized for your procedural motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request unanimous consent to suspend Assembly Rule 63 and Assembly Rule 69 and allow Assemblymember Gonzalez to take up late amendments to AB 2757 and, upon adoption of the amendments, allow her to take up the measure in mock-up form without reference to file for the purpose of third reading.
Ms. Waldron.
We object to the motion and ask for a roll call, please.
Ms. Waldron is withholding unanimous consent. Mr. Calderon moves and Mr. Gibson seconds.